and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Uh, my name is Rajarshi, and I work for the Institute for Global Environmental Strategies, which is in Japan, and the beautiful Satoyama of Kanagawa Prefecture. I think some of you must have visited those places. This presentation is about Satoyama Development Mechanism, and in English, the close translation is Socio-Ecological Production Landscape and Seascapes for the Satoyama. As you can see, there are 4 logos here. So one is IGS, the institute I belong. One is the United Nations University, where Dr. Ivan belongs to that institute. And of course, we have the Ministry of Environment of Japan. And we all work under the platform of Satoyama Initiative. In this presentation, I must acknowledge my co-authors, which is Mr. Yasuo Takahashi, Dr. Federico Lopez, and Sabrina. Sabrina is an intern from Stanford University. She is currently working with us, and she has made a lot of contribution in this presentation, so I thank all of them. Okay, so my presentation has 4 components. I think most of you know about Satoyama Development Mechanism, but still, for those who do not know, I will just briefly explain. The second point is, which is very important, that we'd like to explain the relationship between Satoyama development and what it contributes in terms of global targets, such as the Aichi targets or the Sustainable Development Goals. Third, we made an online survey under this SDM, so I'll share the results with you. And of course, what is the future of the Satoyama initiative and how we take it forward from here. Okay, so to brief the brief overview of SDM project. So basically, during the Aichi COP, I think you all know that CVD COP in Nagoya. So the IPSI was formed, and under IPSI at that time, around 50 odd members, members or organizations, they decided to start the SDM. They decided to start collaborating, and what we found in the due course of time that even the ideas are very good, but there is no fund. No start-off fund. So for that, in 2013, the Ministry of Environment in Japan decided to have a seed funding program, which is just mere $10,000. But when we started it, we thought like it might have a long-term impact because we wanted to start some good work on the ground. And we work very much with the IPSI objectives, and you can see that first of our target is to promote implementation activities under IPSI strategies. Second is promote development of model practices for living in harmony with nature through the SEPLs or with the sustainable, this is actually Satoyama. And last one is provide an incentive for IPSI policy members and partnerships to generate knock-on effects. So these are with these objectives. We try to fund projects, which is low-scale projects. Sorry. You can see there are 4 components we fund. First one is the community-based project, field projects, which is mainly done through NGOs like you. Second is small research funding, where you try to generate some impacts on the grounds through some small research funding. And of course, we support Kickstart cooperation with IPSI members and activities to build capacities and awareness about IPSI. Okay, so far since 2013, we have funded 30 projects so far. And we have a bit of lengthy screening process. So I'm not going into the details of this, but we do consider the relevance of these projects when we screen these projects. So relevance, effectiveness, feasibility, and sustainability, these are the 4 components we look for. And I think from Taiwan, you have the highest number of projects funded under this program. So I must congratulate you for being so enthusiastic about Satoyama development. So many thanks for that. Sorry, this is not visible probably. So this is the number of projects we have funded. This shows the number of applications. This is the number of granted projects. So most of our projects is from Asia Pacific, but we also cover Africa, America, and Europe. Second is by project type. So as I mentioned that our main thrust area is community or field-based projects, which is through generating some local knowledges And lastly, by organization type, of course, you can see the NGOs and CBOs are the most funded of our thing, but we also fund universities and research institutes. Well, this is the distribution of our projects so far. So you can see here is the Taiwan. So I think it's still not visible properly, but it has more than 5 projects, or almost all the year it has got 1 project. So far we have funded 30 projects, and the call for 2018 is just closed, and we are currently reviewing the applications. And activity-wise, as you can see here, in Asia Pacific we have the highest projects, and community field projects is number 8 out of 14. So it's a big chunk of the projects goes to the community projects. Okay, so after that we decided to ask our project proponents who have already received the grants from us to map their activities against the Aichi targets, the 20 Aichi targets, and the SDGs. So this is how the results came. I'm just giving you just overall idea. So you can see that this part, this Aichi targets 14, 15, and somewhere in 18. 18 is collaboration, 14 is on ecosystem use, and the number 7 is sustainable agriculture. So these are the main key thrust areas which they themselves identified that they are contributing. And when we tried to map it against SDGs, so it appears like this. So you can see that there are 2 components. First is the goal number 1, 2, 3, and the last for 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. So these goals are mostly the environmental goals, as you can see here. And these goals are mostly the social economic goals, which is like 1, 2, 3. So basically our projects is trying to bridge the social and development goals as rightly the notion of the sepals. Okay, so I now briefly talk about the survey we did. So we actually did an online survey, a detailed online survey for the 30 projects we funded so far. And we tried to investigate like how these projects made some interventions into the communities. So, and how their impacts on the sustainable impacts on the ground impacts. So basically this is the framework of our analysis. Like we first tried to understand what best practices they have developed so far, whether they have shared the best practices, whether there is they have made some partnership through their other IPSI members or the government, and whether they have secured additional funding resources. So these are the 4 components we evaluated. And here you can see we tried to identify the project interventions, what they have really worked on the ground, and whether this is in line with the IFC objectives, and all these are very much interrelated, the Aichi targets and the sustainable development goals. And here you can see there are 2 ranking methods. One is the impact gradient, like whether the impact they have created, which is just a plan or an action or an output or an outcome. By outcome, we mean that this has a long-term effect. They have really motivated the communities, and it has like self-sustaining. And what are the scale of operations? Sometimes it's a local, most of the times it's a local, subnational, national, regional, and global. So this is a bit complicated, but we first created a relational database for all the activities they have mentioned in Microsoft Access. I'm not going into details of this, but this is all the data we had from the questionnaire. And okay. So this looks like this, like what kind of interventions they have made. This is the project number, the interventions they have made, and this is the detailed narrative, what they have written in the feedback. And we tried to classify it in terms of the spatial scales and what kind of particular activities made in the IPSI targets. And secondly, we, as I mentioned in the weightage scale, so we tried to identify each of the interventions against some of the Aichi targets, as well as tried to give some weightage to this. And then we did some network analysis using R. So I'm not going into the coding, of course. So these are the networks. So basically, we identified 124 unique interventions they have made during these projects. And we classified it in terms of the IPBS classifications of interventions, project interventions. So these 5 categories like legal interventions, economic interventions, right-based interventions, social and information interventions, and institutional information. So we classified as by the recently concluded the IPBES Asia Pacific Regional Assessment. And we further added this number 6 component, which is innovation. So this is we added in the next 5. So the results shows like this when we talk about the legal regulatory interventions. So for example, I have multiple slides, but I will just explain a couple of slides. So for instance, the legal and regulatory standards. So it stands for intervention 1.2 here. And it shows like very strong linkages with the Aichi target 14. So we can have all the contributing, the interventions have contributed to all this, like Aichi target 1, 14, 4, 2, 14. So basically the size of the bubbles, it denotes the greater intervention, greater contribution. And of course the thickness of the line also denotes almost the same. Okay, so this is one example for legal interventions. For example, this is from Kenya, where they made, the fishermen made with the local forest department, they made some beach vigilance program where they have really reduced the number of poaching of this turtle. So this is one sort of legal intervention along with the government. And you can see the financial interventions, which is we find that this intervention 2 points at an alternative sustainable livelihood. I think many of you have targeted this component earlier too. So it has contributed into Aichi target 19, 14, 15, SDG 2 and SDG 15. So again, one example for this is from the Conservation Alliance in Ghana, where the local farmers actually tried to obtain the ecological certification, and they also trained the local farmers to get the Rainforest Alliance certification audit. So these are the components. Sorry, I don't have much time to explain, but yeah. So then we made this diagram for the right-based interventions, and what we found is the recognize and support the indigenous and customary rights. So this has largely contributed to Aichi biodiversity 13 and 2 and 1. So these are the list of Aichi biodiversity targets which has contributed by this kind of intervention. Followed by, this is one example from India. So when this is one NGO, they have tried to promote the sustainable harvesting using local knowledge, using the same like him, which using the local women group. Then we had social and information interventions. So basically, we had voluntary agreements, partnerships. So these are the 2 main interventions. So it actually contributes to this Aichi target, 4 Aichi targets, and 3 sustainable development goals. And again, a couple of examples here from Kenya again. So we had, and there's the same study actually. So they have tried to strengthen the community monitoring and all this. Last one is the management-based interventions, where we found that it's really interesting that somebody maintains a biodiversity registers in the local communities. So this is actually contributing to a lot of Aichi targets and sustainable development goals. I again give you an example from Thailand, where the local community is trying to maintain a biodiversity register, and they try to document all the indigenous crop varieties over there, so which is quite interesting. And lastly, the innovation and integration. So these kind of interventions are basically mainly designed for ecological productions or ecotourism, etc. So again, you can see that these interventions are closely linked with Aichi target 2, 1, 4, 2, SDG 2, 17, and 8. For example, this is in Bangladesh, where aquaculture expansion is a big problem in Bangladesh. So they are trying to do some innovative form of aquaculture by which the large-scale degradation of the landscape is reversed. And okay, so now to coming into other results, like whether our supported projects have generated some on-the-ground impact. So we tried to understand like how they shared their experiences. So this is one survey which we found like, which we found that most of them have shared through conferences as well as social network services, but some of them also written academic journal paper on their experience of Satayama. Then again, we tried to understand the synergies with IPSI activities, and we found like 44 engagements by total 22 organizations, and which is main part is our thematic assessment report, and I think Professor Lingley, you have already contributed in this report. Thank you very much for that. Lastly, we try to understand that how they have collaborated with different organizations outside the IPSI members. So we find that most of the projects have tried to collaborate with the local government, which is a very positive thing to take these lessons forward. And lastly, the most importantly, is the funding. So we are trying to understand whether with this seed funding they could generate additional funding or not. So what we found, which is very encouraging, that most of them, or 70% of them, they could generate additional funding. And to the tune of, so we invested about $294,000 in 30 projects, which came out, they have already secured around $696,000 from different sources. And you can see the main international donors they received. One is Jeff Satayama project, which I'm also personally involved. But I see a lot of names from Taiwan. They have thank you very much for supporting these projects. We really thank from our institute and from the Ministry of Environment. And this is a sort of self-evaluation. So we tried to understand how the grantees evaluate us. So this is the results. So mostly they are satisfied with this grant, and most of them mentioned that apart from the grant, the SDM gives a big certificate or name to their institutes or the organization, which is a sort of good thing to showcase and apply for additional funding. And lastly, so to make the conclusion, so we find that this SDM project has a lot to deal with the Aichi biodiversity target. And as I mentioned, that it has contributed to recognize and support indigenous and customary 10 years. So through all these targets, I'm not going to read all this, but most of the targets are covered under the Aichi and Sustainable Development Target. And you can see the other objective was to integrate the biodiversity and socioeconomic benefits and ecological production. So this, like all these targets are also again, I think substantially covered in the SDM projects. And lastly, the sustainable lifestyle, social norms, and voluntary agreements. So this is actually not very well covered, but partly covered. But this 14 is actually very well covered, like 14 and 15. So there are a couple of mangrove projects and most of the projects on terrestrial ecosystems. And of course, the best part is we are very happy that the projects that we funded could generate additional funding. They could really make impacts. And if you take the total volume of fund they have secured, including the committed funds, so if we just take $10,000, it's actually 70% return on this, so it is quite big. And also they could collaborate well with other organizations. But still, what I must say that we have rooms for improvement as a funder, and this is mostly related to like people have complained a bit as like how do we didn't mention how we select the projects. We are following a more clearer instruction this time, and we'll be evaluating a very open evaluation kind of thing. So I hope we will continue this project for at least next 2 years. I'm not sure about after the post-Aichi thing, but we'll definitely try to mold it in terms of the post-Aichi targets also. So with this, thank you very much. So if you need more information about our project, you can log into this site. And this is my institute, located in the Kanagawa Prefecture, a very nice place. So thank you so much.